Hello and welcome to our November third-party roundup webinar with Syxsense. Today, we have our industry expert, John Cassell, here to give us an inside look on the newest third-party patch releases. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat and John will reach out after to answer those. And with that, John Cassell.
Hey everyone, thank you for attending today's third-party roundup webcast. For my US audience, I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. And a few of you didn't spend too much on Black Friday deals. Didn't myself this year, but it's probably a good thing. Today, I'll be covering some of the most popular third-party applications that have received updates since the start of November. There have been a number of security bulletins and advisories throughout the month, as well as multiple version updates across various products. Quick background, though. I typically cover this month after month just so that we have a nice foundation getting into the different severity levels and how we want to kind of classify our updates. For most third-party applications, we actually have no idea when they'll be provided by their vendors. Most manufacturers have no guaranteed release cadence to rely on. However, Microsoft has been using the second Tuesday of the month for well over a decade, and many manufacturers have followed suit, such as Adobe being the first manufacturer we'll look at today. I also perform this webcast on the last Tuesday of the month to ensure I can capture most of the month's releases. Unfortunately, the last few months I've had to catch up from the previous month. Last month it landed on Halloween, the 31st. Sure thing, of course, there was an update drop that day and I'll cover it a little bit, but I do try to cover everything, of course. Let's briefly discuss what a vulnerability is versus what a patch or an update does. A vulnerability is a bug or misconfiguration in a product, an application, or an operating system that, if exploited, allows that product or system to be compromised by an attacker. A patch or update is instead a piece of software or code published by the vendor of that product or system, I should say, to resolve the vulnerability. With that being said, not all vulnerabilities can be patched, and not all patches resolve vulnerabilities. If a vulnerability exists in a product or a system and no patch or workaround is available, then the vulnerability is considered a zero-day exploit. And we'll typically hear about those again on that exact day when it's disclosed to everybody. Before we get into the latest updates, how do we prioritize them? There are multiple strategies out there. Here at Syxsense, we focus on 6 different factors. And the first, vendor severity, is going to typically range from critical to non-applicable. And comes directly from the manufacturer of that update. It is important to always check the vendor severity of any update. However, do bear in mind that it can clearly be biased. Many third-party updates or applications don't receive severities from their manufacturers, as it would, of course, highlight the product in a negative light. So to combat this, we as well prioritize, I should say instead, the industry severity, such as the CVSS or Common Vulnerability Scoring System, calculated by an independent organization. This score ranges from 0 to 10, with 10 being the most severe and critical. The higher the rating, typically entails higher possibility of exploitation. Then we deal with the state of the vulnerability, such as weaponization. This means that it's actively being exploited in the wild and can affect any individual or environment at this exact moment by sophisticated attacks. When vulnerabilities become publicly disclosed, that means that the structure, the blueprint of the bug has been exposed to the industry. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's currently being exploited, but that pretty much all the details are out there on how to weaponize it. And they're typically published by bug bounty programs, independent researchers, or sometimes the manufacturer. A lot of the times when it is publicly disclosed, or if it has been disclosed by a researcher, it's usually direct to the manufacturer and an update drops in that exact moment to say, we're going to resolve this. But usually that is going to be for a 0-day. Lastly, though, countermeasures are also a possibility and are provided in a few different ways. A mitigation, such as a configuration from an antivirus or an EDR that's stopping the vulnerability in its tracks without urgently making a change. And the other countermeasure is a workaround, such as a registry policy or a service configuration change maybe that also prevents the vulnerability from being exploited. A great example of this is when Microsoft provides a recommended policy or a registry change. A lot of times, and historically, it's been against, say, Windows Server or a DNS server, a domain controller, to make a change to the actual role without the need to actually deploy an out-of-band update, which usually, of course, would take the actual service down. Finally, the 6th factor in determining our strategy is the exposure, and this breakdown is based on what tool or solution is being used to detect and report on outstanding vulnerabilities across the device fleet. Every environment, of course, is different, typically includes various versions of operating systems. Knowing where those vulnerabilities exist, of course, allows us to better target the endpoints for remediation. So anyone that's watching, of course, you might have a different number in that exposure, of course, than the next individual. Jumping into it, the third-party products that we'll be discussing today have all received updates since the month started and all resolve some sort of vulnerability. It's the reason that we prioritize a lot of the same names on this webcast, but why we talk about the same ones. It's all based on visibility and, of course, the criticality of the vulnerabilities that have been disclosed. Also, most products mentioned have some sort of advisory, especially from the vendors, but as well, many receiving alerts from the cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency to update as soon as possible. So the first, as mentioned, Adobe. And this is a very interesting release. It's probably the biggest release I've actually seen since we started the webcast, or at least I started talking about third-party applications 3 or 4 years ago. And I don't want to mention this as well over and over. All products for the Adobe release this month have all been stamped with a lower vendor severity of, or priority rather, they use the term priority, of 3. They flip the model upside down compared to the CVSS score. The higher the number with Adobe means the less likely for exploitation. So it's a good thing if it's got a higher number, but a 1 would be definitely concerning. Fortunately, we did not see that this month, but alternatively, 14 products got updated on November 14th. I'll be covering a lot of them very lightly. They may not apply to you, but I've also looked at them and reorganized slightly in terms of the criticality. The first one is Adobe Cold Fusion. Cold Fusion had 6 total fixes, 3 of them critical, and 2 that I really wanted to highlight first. Also, it was the first product in their listing, so kind of lined up there. The first one I looked at had a lot of critical scores. I thought, what am I getting myself into? And as I started getting the rest of the updates, they weren't as critical. So we're starting with the craziest. First one for Cold Fusion is a vulnerability track to CVE 2023 44350 related to deserialization of untrusted data with a critical CVSS score of 9.1. Another one, which is consecutive in number, 44351, is also a deserialization of untrusted data vulnerability with a critical score of 9.8. Near perfect critical, if that's a term. If exploited, either could lead to arbitrary code execution. So if you happen to be using Cold Fusion, definitely make sure that you're receiving updates, that your services are on the latest version. Otherwise, you've got some massive vulnerabilities within that product. RoboHelp Server, which affects Windows, had 5 total fixes, 4 of them critical. All of them have a CVSS base score between 7.2 and 8.2. Make sure you update as well. Acrobat and Reader, still very popular out there. 17 total fixes, 9 of them critical. Adobe Acrobat and Reader affects Windows and macOS devices. 2 that I want to highlight. They're actually the same exact vulnerability, so I'll just mention one. CVE 2023 44336 is a use after free issue with a critical score of 8.8. There's another one listed, again, 2023 44372, also use after free issue with a critical score of 8.8. If exploited, of course, as always, typically with Adobe exploits, could lead to arbitrary code execution. The rest of the fixes for Acrobat and Reader include out-of-bounds read, out-of-bounds write, access of uninitialized pointer, of which, if any are exploited, again, could lead to arbitrary code execution or memory leak. The next product is Adobe InDesign with 7 total fixes. I'm going to speed things up a little bit as these aren't as critical as the other versions, but I'll make sure to highlight the critical ones a little bit more. InDesign had 7 fixes affecting Windows and macOS with an average score of 5.33. Photoshop, still very popular out there, 6 total fixes, 1 critical, also affecting Windows and macOS. The vulnerability I wanted to highlight here, though, is tracked as CVE 2023 44330 with a CVSS score of 7.8. It's an out-of-bounds write issue that, if exploited, could lead to arbitrary code execution. Adobe Bridge with 3 moderate fixes, and if exploited, could actually lead to memory leak, and that affects your Windows and macOS devices. FrameMaker publishing server, one critical. It's actually another one that I wanted to highlight. I should have probably moved it to the top. CVE 2023 44324 with a CVSS score of 9.8. So if you happen to be leveraging FrameMaker publishing server on your Windows devices, make sure that you update that. That's an improper access control and again could lead to security feature bypass. Adobe InCopy had a critical for Windows and macOS devices. That critical is a 7.8 score for out-of-bounds read. Adobe Animate had an important out-of-bounds read bug affecting Windows and macOS. Adobe Dimension with another important out-of-bounds read bug also affecting Windows and macOS. Adobe Media Encoder with 5 total fixes, 4 of them being critical. Definitely make sure that if you're using or leveraging Media Encoder that you update. Adobe Audition with 9 total fixes, 6 of them critical, with CVSS scores of 7.8, so kind of on the lower side of what I would consider critical. Probably not critical from a CVSS standpoint, but Adobe did stamp as critical, so definitely make sure you update. Premiere Pro had 5 criticals out of 6 fixes, and that affects Windows and macOS. And then lastly, Adobe After Effects with 8 total fixes, 6 as well still being critical. That if exploited could lead to, you guessed it, arbitrary code execution. So moving on to the next product, Google Chrome was actually a light month. I was very surprised. This is actually the product as mentioned earlier, dropped an update later on the day of our webcast, which is now I think the 3rd month in a row that Chrome has dropped it on later on that Tuesday. So let me check real quick. I actually kept it open here just in case they drop another release. Nothing yet. But given my luck, it might drop later today. So we'll expect that and we'll bring it up next month. On the 31st of October, there were 15 total security issues resolved, with 13 of them being disclosed by external researchers. 3 of these fixes were high, 8 were medium or moderate, with 2 being low, and involved inappropriate implementation, insufficient data validation, integer overflow, incorrect security UI, and use after free vulnerabilities. The total in bug bounties for the Halloween release of Chrome totaled $40,500 US. So a pretty big, substantial payout for a general release. November 7th, there was another drop of Google Chrome with only 1 security fix disclosed by the Ant Group Lightyear Security Lab with no bounty payout. It's not applicable. This involved a high severity use after free issue in web audio, tracked as CVE 2023 5996. The next release was on November 14th, with 4 total security fixes, 2 being disclosed by external researchers, totaling $10,000 US in bounties. The 2 issues were both high severity, both use after free issues within garbage and navigation. And that was our last release, surprisingly. So I think it's probably going to occur today, given my luck. Still nothing. I'm just going to keep refreshing until this call ends and let everybody know so I can definitely get on it this month. But again, it'll probably be brought up next month. I always like to bring this up when discussing Chrome, though. Looking back, 2021 was a very tough year for Chrome, as the browser had 16 zero-day exploits in the same year. Last year, there were 9. This month didn't add any to the list, and that puts Chrome still at 5 0 days for 2023. It's definitely looking much healthier than previous years, but again, we still have a month left, and I'm hoping that we can still end it as well on 5. Bear in mind that as well, many other Chromium browsers have also received updates following suit with Chrome. This includes as well Opera, Brave, and of course, Microsoft Edge. Edge had 7 releases, technically. So as much as there are 7, many of them drop on the same day with slight version increments. So we'll kind of generalize those same day releases that occurred on the 2nd, on the 9th, and on the 16th of November. The November 2nd release had 5 total feature updates for compression dictionary to transport support, behavioral changes to the before unload event, split screen restore improvements, additional capability to manage the sidebar apps, and updates to MS Edge Enterprise Sync settings page. There were 3 new policies dropped to switch intranet sites to a work profile, switching sites on the IE mode site list to a work profile, and to allow use of organizations' branding assets from M365 on the mobile-related UI of a work profile. Also, more importantly for this webcast, there were 3 Edge-specific vulnerabilities. So Edge, again, follows suit with Chrome, but they can as well have, or introduce rather, or I should say, hopefully resolve their own vulnerabilities from their own product. And there, again, there were 3. The first one is tracked as CVE 2023-36022. Actually, I have to look these up as there were some slight changes, it appears. 36022 has a CVSS score of 6.6. It's related to a remote code execution vulnerability, but exploitation is less likely. The next one tracked as 36029 was a spoofing vulnerability with a CVSS of 4.3. Definitely concerning for these, but now that I'm really going to spend too much time on, and of course for many versions past at this point, also exploitation is less likely. The last one for the November 2nd release actually had a higher score, tracked as 36034, was also remote code execution vulnerability with a CVSS score of 7.3. Exploitation was again less likely. Checking the page, love how Microsoft actually details these things. And since I am sharing, may as well show everybody else what I'm looking at. When I check on the release notes for Microsoft Edge, there are Edge-specific vulnerability sections where it takes me directly to the full write-up. So this is actually excellent. I would love if most manufacturers provided something like this. We kind of took a brief look at this last month in providing all of the different metrics and values, of course, giving us a picture of the vulnerability itself. Moving on to the next release from the 9th, there were, again, 2, but we'll kind of look at both of them the same. There were 2 new policy updates. MS Edge Management Service Policy overrides platform policy, and as well allowing MS Edge Management Service user policies to override policies set through an enrollment token. There were as well 3 additional Edge-specific vulnerabilities. First one is 36014 with a CVSS of 7.3. Exploitation less likely. I always want to check down here the exploitability. A lot of that does, of course, already factor into the CVSS score as all of this is constantly being analyzed, but it doesn't appear to have any changes since. 36024 is an elevation of privilege vulnerability with, again, a higher score of 7.1, but no change. And I don't also see anything regarding user interaction. It is required. I always take a look at this particular field as well. How is the user actually being leveraged here? The end user, let's be honest, is the biggest vulnerability, I would say. And then elevation of privilege vulnerability, the last one for the 9th release of Edge 36027, also a higher score of 7.1. User interaction is again required, and exploitation is less likely. The last version upgrade, or the last, I should say, pair that dropped was on the 16th. Actually, we have a 27th release, but it didn't have any fixes. The 16th release had 2 Edge-specific vulnerabilities. First tracked is 36008, remote code execution, lower score 6.6, still high, I would say, but not as concerning. And I again see all the same values as the last one. The other was 36026, and a much lower score. I would say that's moderate, 4.3. And then when we look at the exploitability, less likely, and again, still requires end user interaction. There was another drop on the 27th. Really nothing was highlighted from Microsoft. When we look at sometimes with the release notes, it'll just say, hey, we dropped an update. There were fixes. Thank you for that information. I got that there were fixes, but nothing for me to provide as well to you guys. Wish I could provide more, but that's been the month for Edge. The next product, Mozilla Firefox, received a few releases since last month, 2, actually. One on the 7th and another on the 21st. The 7th release was very minor, actually, to Firefox 119.0.1. I usually don't see security fixes in these sub-releases, or the sub-revisions, I should say. So there are minor bug fixes, sorry, losing my voice, with no security fixes to highlight. The 21st release, though, and I may as well just bring this up on the screen, since I have the link handy. To Firefox 120, there were 10 security fixes, 6 high, 2 moderate, 2 low. Where do I get that information? Right down here. I love how Mozilla lays out the information as well. It is a manufacturer being more open source that are providing their own ratings, and I do trust the ratings too, and nothing is hidden. They're very transparent about the fact that, yes, there were high severity issues within this release, tracking each, of course, issue. Again, there were 10 total that were disclosed, 6 high, 2 moderate, 2 low. The very bottom, we typically see that there are always memory safety bugs resolved, and as well, there's always going to be something provided in the extended support release. And anything, I'll mention it now, any updates that typically apply to Firefox are usually as well going to apply to Mozilla Thunderbird, an email client, maybe not as popular these days, but definitely has gotten use out of the last decade. For the rest of this release, there were some new changes. Firefox now supports copy link without site tracking within the context menu. Global privacy control can be enabled with telling websites not to sell or share data, and that's enabled in privacy mode by default, with a number of security features for users in Germany, as well as enhancements for Linux users around picture-in-picture and importing from Chrome. As mentioned, if you happen to be using other Mozilla products, they're probably using the same code base. A lot of the same vulnerabilities typically get shared to the next product. Notepad++ had an interesting month. On the 23rd, it moved to version 8.6, and it was the 20th anniversary of Notepad++ since it first launched in version 1.0 on SourceForge in 2003. And that's kind of crazy thinking back, because I remember having very early versions of Notepad++, and it really helped me in my early coding days. To quote the manufacturer, or I should say the developer, from 1.0 to the current version 8.6, there have been 238 official releases. At the beginning of the project, it has been a one-man show, from coding to web design to marketing to logo design to user interaction, which confirms that, quote, within a quote, doing open source projects is like being stranded on a deserted island. The bad news is you have to do everything yourself, and the good news is you have to do everything yourself. He goes on, and the developer's name is Don Ho. On this occasion, Notepad++'s 20th birthday, I want to express my gratitude to all of the contributors. Without you, Notepad++ would not be what it is today. And I love hearing comments like that being made about open source projects, especially to see them go on to 20 years. Multi-edit is the main feature of this version, as well as another frequently demanded feature to remember inaccessible files across the sessions by using empty and read-only documents as placeholders. It's great news for the lead visionary, again, Don Ho, but bad news for its current users, in which there is a curl vulnerability with a critical score that was disclosed. The vulnerability is tracked as CVE 2023-38545 and was assigned a 9.8 CVSS score. Although, as of this morning, it has been flagged as undergoing reanalysis, I saw. Quite interesting. So we might actually see that change. And if I see a change, I'll track it and bring it up next month. Either way, if you have Notepad++ installed, be sure to update as soon as possible so that you're not affected by that critical issue. Other products that have received updates since the start of the month include Audacity, and there are more than I can fit on the slide. Audacity, Bitwarden, Cisco products with, again, another typical CISA advisory for multiple Cisco products, Dropbox, FileZilla, Foxit Reader, Genesis Cloud, Jenkins, Malwarebytes, Power BI, RingCentral, Skype, Slack, TeamViewer, VMware Horizon Client, Wireshark, and Zoom. And let me check the Chrome release page again. Still nothing. All right, I'll let you guys know. Before we close this down, though, product I always bring up, Apple. Now, I know it's not considered a third-party application per se, but it is one that I always want to highlight on this webcast because, well, historically, there have been a lot of 0 days. Fortunately, it's an amazing month for Apple users. There was a single advisory on November 7th. And let me just double check that. Let's all double check that. In fact, I have the link right here. No change. Perfect. By the way, you can always Google or go to, well, I don't know if you remember that knowledge base ID, but Google Apple security releases. They also have great information providing breakdown of all the different vulnerabilities. If there are tracked CVEs, just simply click on the version right here. of the product, and then I'll detail a little bit more. But yeah, there was a single release on the 7th of November for watchOS, macOS Sonoma, and Ventura, iOS 17, and iPadOS 17, but nothing to disclose and no 0 days. It's excellent. It's been pretty much the entire year for Apple users to receive some type of notification or get updates to resolve some sort of 0 day. Unfortunately, it was a good month. I hope that this has been informative and useful to everybody. And if you enjoy the form of this webcast or not, please contact us, let us know. Every day, the Syxsense team identifies, classifies, pre-checks various patches and vulnerabilities that affect common endpoints and servers. To get a full listing of all the various issues that may impact your environment, be sure to check our website under resources. You'll see a link to the vulnerability database. Before we leave, I may as well just bring that up. Actually drive over here to syxsense.com. At the very top under resources, you'll see that link right here for the vulnerability database. What I love about it is it's a full library, of course, that we not only just discuss level of impact like everybody else, but we also offer recommendations and resolutions to every issue. For example, if you look at a post-patching mitigation, like we talked about earlier, here's one I've been talking about for the past few months, a remote code execution vulnerability that was sideloaded as an optional workaround, although it has now been patched since July. Syxsense also provides the full breakdown. So if there are mitigations or workarounds, be sure to check our website as well. We'll probably provide more information to you on how you can resolve it yourself, but as well, quick plug, we also have resolutions in our product. So something to think about. If you have any further questions, concerns, or suggestions for improvement, we would love to hear it. Thanks everybody for your time. Happy patching and happy holidays.